Kookaburra is the international cricket ball. I know you might be thinking about SG or Dukes at the moment, and you may even think that they're better. I think that's fair enough. But we don't use either of them all that much. So that makes Kookaburra just the de facto international cricket ball, even if it is a smallish sports manufacturer from Melbourne that makes Australian rules footballs, tennis rackets, and hockey equipment.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
In fact, Kookaburra are actually two test balls because they also bought the Reader brand in the UK, which used to produce them for England. They even have another international ball, the Dimple Elite in hockey. And according to their website, they have over 200 staff, which is not a lot of people, especially when you factor in hockey, footy, and tennis. Compare it to Rawlings, the baseball manufacturer. They have 1,200 staff, and even they aren't that big an organisation. It's also worth noting that Rawlings is co-owned by Major League Baseball, and so they have a say in what happens with their product. They can game the ball directly if they want more, or on rare occasions, fewer runs. This brings its own problems. Ask baseball fans about the ball-led conspiracies. But it does allow for Rawlings and Major League Baseball to focus on quality. Rawlings aren't worried about going out of business or market pressure. The people who buy their product own them. They are safe and secure to make the best balls possible, which probably means the ones that allow for the most home runs. Outside of pitches, nothing impacts the game more than balls in cricket. And yet we don't really regulate either of them correctly. So our sport depends entirely on local curators and a small family-run company with little to no oversight from the game itself. Cricket is a billion-dollar business with amateur management of the actual product itself. This is a deeply unserious sport. This is the entire history of modern cricket by average. From the moment that ODI cricket really becomes a thing, and then for the next 40 years. As is apparent, besides a few small moments where the lines meet up, red ball batting has always been so much better than its white ball cousin. And of course, that makes sense. In ODI cricket, you're attacking more, using the air and slogging at the end. But you can see that after all those years of red ball batting averaging so much more, the white ball batters finally started to catch up. And then they went ahead. And we know partly this was because everyone stopped making runs in Test cricket. But it was also because top order players in ODIs started batting for a very long time while making more runs. And this whole thing was such a trend that I did an entire podcast on the fact that white ball batters were beating their Test friends for the first time ever. Some of this was the natural evolution of white ball cricket, because there just are more runs, and so in some ways the averages are going to go up. But I hadn't thought about it much since I made that podcast until Australia hosted Zimbabwe and New Zealand, and this person sent me a tweet about whether the balls had changed. And I figured they were doing what a lot of us do. We see a bunch of wickets and we think there must be a new trend. Except this person was massively onto something. Since the start of 2021, ODI batting has completely dropped off. It was not exactly what I was expecting. But when you look at this, it's just one hell of a slide. But this is just the last 4 years with 2 high ones and 2 low ones. So it is worth looking further back. So let's say the last 10 years. And the years 21 and 22 are still the lowest. Even if they have a little bit more company, and this year is not actually finished yet. These are not all-time lows, of course, because white ball cricket only just got this good with the averages per wicket. But it was clearly trending up when it suddenly fell down. And of course I am talking about average here. But the same drop happened in runs per overs. It's the lowest it's been since the year 2010. And ODI cricket was basically a different sport back then. So going back to that kind of rate is quite a drop. So I think we could agree that something went on around the year 2021 because that is when the runs start disappointing from white ball cricket. And I do have a hunch. So I checked fast bowling because that's what I felt had changed. And it was clear that quick bowlers were on top in a way that they haven't been in almost 20 years. It was 2003 when the bowling average was this low from seam alone. But even then, I thought it could be a little bit clearer than this. And I also wanted to look at the exact moment the ODI cricket had its boom, from 2015 onwards. And then while I was in that peak period, it was the top of the innings that I thought would be the most interesting. The first 10 overs. Because if you lose wickets there, that usually trickles down throughout the rest of the game. And you can see that it's clearly not going well at the top for the batters at the moment. So what has caused all this? Because without belaboring the point, ODI batting was going great, even as the Test game was falling into the toilet. And if you think about the theory behind England's Bazball, It does make sense, especially in the UK where England couldn't find a test batter, but their white ball hitting was still outstanding. So you just use the limited overs biffs to hack tests. Of course, that doesn't work if the white ball batting is starting to have the same drop. And I'll be honest, I don't have a perfect answer for any of this, but I still had a bit of a hunch. And for that to be true, I wanted to look at the T20 numbers as well, because while I haven't seen anyone bring it up, for me to be correct, the same trends would have to be happening in the 20 over game. This is T20. And you can see again that in the last 2 years, we've had the same kind of drop as one-day cricket. I don't think this is a coincidence. And I just want to show it even clearer. Here is the seam bowling average in the first 10 overs of one-day internationals compared to the first 4 overs of a T20. Basically the first 20% of both these matches. But I also just looked at the first 5 overs as well, because that's how old an ODI ball is at the 10 over mark, because we used 2 of them. Either way, the pattern was about the same for both. The very new white ball is doing damage, and over the last 2 years that has translated to an overall drop in limited overs batting. And now back to my hunch, which I'm not exactly sure of, but I think is a fairly solid idea. Basically, if it's happening in ODI cricket and T20 cricket, it's the ball. But that's not so easy to prove. First, I actually need to go back to the test ball, because over a long period of time, the Kookaburra was derided. They went soft early on, the seam was never very helpful, people made a lot of runs, and they just often produced incredibly dull cricket. At the same time, the Dukes ball specifically, less so the SG ball, got very popular, to the point where it was also used in the West Indies. Most people in cricket just believe that the Dukes is a better ball, and that ultimately produces much more enjoyable cricket to watch. But the most significant moment was when Australia's domestic competition, the Sheffield Shield, started using it. That is a big deal because Kookaburra is an Australian company and also an Australian bird. So to lose your own market would be a huge slap in the face, while also being a pretty massive vote of no confidence from the people who know your ball better than anyone else. So as this started to happen, finally Kookaburra decided to improve their ball, market pressure and all that. Sometime around 2017, there were trials of a new Kookaburra. There was even an article about them putting extra lacquer on the ball. But in late 2020, they released a new Kookaburra with a reinforced seam. This made the entire ball firmer, and importantly, it meant that it would move laterally more for seam bowlers. And let me be clear, fixing the Kookaburra was well overdue and completely essential. But that was the red ball. The white ball's problems were completely different. The reason ODIs needed 2 of them has nothing to do with the seam, it's because the leather cannot be dyed white, and so they have to be painted, and it peels off. You would think that would be the thing that everyone in cricket would want them to fix, because at the moment, if you want a one-day international, you have to buy twice as many balls. I mean, realistically, everyone in world cricket should be completely annoyed by that. Especially the boards who are actually paying for it. Instead, they just continue to order double the amount of balls and actually change the playing conditions in order to allow for this. There is something wrong in the cricket world, and while it may not be a conspiracy, there does seem to be a movement towards leaving more grass on the wicket, and thusly, the global batting average has dropped. If a similar thing has happened to you in your personal life, try Manscaped. Their Lawnmower 4.0 will help you trim any unwanted pubic grass. And once your downstairs track is taken care of, you can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations. So before heading outside, use the Crop Preserver ball deodorant to stay cool in the heat. And if you've been playing too many games recently and you need some help with your strip, why don't you go and get their Crop Reviver? I think I may possibly have taken all of this analogy too far. But the point is, Manscaped sells items that allow you to shave your pubic itch pitch. Use the code REDINKER, all one word, which is the name of my podcast, and you can get a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping while you curate your special strip like a team of sweaty men hoping it doesn't rain. And just a quick aside, if you are wondering what impact a change of balls can have in cricket, think back to the summer of Bazball, which just finished. The first half of that season was all about New Zealand's middle order players being basically undismissible and the England ones chasing any target set in front of them. Then the Dukes changed midway through the summer from a flat COVID batch to a normal Dukes ball. And suddenly no one could score a run in the last 3 matches. It shows you just how much a small change in balls can really change the cricket on the field. So when our major cricket ball manufacturer does something different, it should be a huge thing within the game. Kookaburra should be open and honest with boards. The boards themselves should be part of the process. And the press and fans should be let in on every single detail available to them. Instead, that's not what really happened with Kookaburra when they changed this seam. When it comes to the white ball seam, the only thing that we have on record is a small quote in Snehal Pradhan's article in 2018. But at that stage, they hadn't even finished anything. And we don't know for sure if the white ball was even reinforced. And that's because Kookaburra has never said anything publicly about this that I could find outside of that one quote. They have been slightly more vocal on the red ball. And so I contacted them via social media and their publicly listed emails, but I heard nothing back from any of those. So I'm trying to piece this together from Dan Brettig's reporting and a few things I've heard from cricket boards around the world. So as far as we can tell, the first test that used that reinforced seam ball was a pretty well-known match. You know, the one where India were dismissed for 36 in Adelaide. But in all honesty, to work out exactly when and where these balls were first used is probably almost impossible. Because even if we knew when they were made and sold, we don't actually know when they were used. Balls don't have identifying marks on them. They often sit in cupboards for ages, and it's not unknown for an older batch to be used 2 years after it was bought. Basically, no one tracks balls unless something has gone wrong with it. And even then, it usually takes an age to work it out. But because they were pink balls, we're pretty sure that that Adelaide test was probably the first time that the reinforced seam ball was used in Australia. Because they were pink balls for their day-night test in Adelaide, we're actually pretty sure in this case that if it wasn't the first time they were used, they were almost the first time they were used. And it's from that moment onwards that the white ball average starts to drop, especially up front. Now, there have been talk about new white balls at time, especially around some of the IPL seasons. However, a lot of that discussion was actually about the lacquer. And I'm not saying that that isn't part of the issue here. It could be that with extra lacquer on the ball, it's swinging for slightly longer. And that would still affect players up front, right? However, I think there's a far bigger culprit here. Although, if that was the case, we would see the ball swinging more, and I'm not sure that we have. So, I think there is a bigger culprit here. Our old friend, the wobble ball, has come into limited overs in the last 2 years. Before that, teams didn't use it that much in ODIs and T20 because the seam was terrible. And now it isn't. And so suddenly that delivery is far more potent. Now, is it possible that I'm seeing wobble balls and batting pandemics where there are none? Yes, because that's kind of what I do here. But remember, I was the first person to notice that there had been a massive drop-off in Test cricket when it came to runs. So what if I am right? Here was a company who was reacting to market pressure from their red ball. So they went and made it more like their main competitors. And then they just copy and pasted that design over to the white ball, which led to a shift in the game, which we didn't need to have. I mean, we're through the looking glass here, people. And it is worth remembering that Kookaburra were trying to make more entertaining cricket balls, even if it was more about keeping their deals rather than a love of the game. But it is worth knowing some extra things about Kookaburra. I mentioned Snehal's article before, which is just a great feature on the rise of Kookaburra. And if you haven't read that article, let me surmise it a little bit. They invented the white ball as a TV prop for Kerry Packer's World Series cricket. He rightly realized that cricket should be played at night and needed something that the players could see. But the white ball was never any good. The umpires used to colour it in between overs. It was first used in a World Cup in 1992, it was used again in 1996. In the 1999 edition, the Dukes ball replaced it because that's what they used in England. But the bowlers completely dominated so much that Kookaburra came back onto the scene, and back in 2003 they were the World Cup ball again, and then from that moment onwards they pretty much took over the entire market. But here is a really funny thing. Many people in cricket believe that the Kookaburra is the official ball and must be used. That's actually not the case at all. The Kookaburra is in no way official. It just became the de facto one so much that everyone has just assumed that it is the official ball. In the last 10 or so years, even the other manufacturers have pretty much given up on ever getting into the white ball market. So they're just busy with their red ones. So the real issue here is that a company with so much power over a game is small and susceptible to the market, and they have no real official ties to the ICC other than as a rather small client. And because they made a change, our game has been affected. And not only has no one noticed, but even if they did, I'm not sure what they could do. Remember, teams kept using terrible red Kookaburras for years, and we still use their white balls despite the fact that they can't even last 35 overs. And in cricket, these kind of things happen a lot. Like when the ICC brought in DRS before they had tested what was essentially TV technology. Or the shockingly low research and development they did on the pink ball that will probably one day be worth billions of dollars to them in revenue. Even if you look at what has happened in the last week or so, they have announced that hybrid pitches will be available for T20Is if both teams agree. That is great for women's and associate cricket and could really help tournament play even at the top level. However, from what I can tell, their research seems to be Gary Stead being part of the cricket committee because New Zealand used some of them in the Netherlands. Also, the Commonwealth Games seem to go off without too many problems. But most cricketers I've ever talked to don't seem to like them at all. Now, it should be mentioned that most cricketers moan about all new things. But even so, I just don't think a lot of research has been done here. I would say that the ICC has done the absolute barest R&D on this idea. I mean, for instance, did the ICC or anyone actually have regulations for what a hybrid pitch is? Because I haven't seen that mentioned anywhere. Even the rise of Kookaburra was haphazard and largely comes from people believing that it is the official ball, when in truth they really got big by offering discounts on balls at the domestic level in order to get in as many international markets as possible. And as I said, from 2003, they just didn't really have any major competitors at all when it comes to the white one. And all these off-field decisions play out on the pitch. From my time in the game over the last 10 or 15 years of talking to people in and around the cricket committee meetings, the members there often make decisions without really dwelling on specifics, using data or doing a lot of research. They certainly don't ask the right questions. And so what does that mean to us as fans of the game? Well, from that golden period of ODI batting, we have lost almost 3.5 runs per wicket. If this was a financial channel, I'd be telling you to sell. And that doesn't include the drop in runs per over. In 2019 and 2020, 272 runs were being scored from the first innings of ODIs if the full overs were being bowled. The 2 years since then, it's been 251. Of course, that doesn't really account for rain or teams being bowled out. In real terms, the average first innings total is now 225, down from 243. Of course, some of that will be affected by rain as well. So if we split the difference, I think we're missing around 19 runs per innings. So let's say 38 runs per match. That's a big difference. Now, obviously, depending on how you like your limited overs cricket, you may even enjoy the fact that bowlers are back on top. Or you could be absolutely beside yourself with rage because you think these formats are for batters. None of that opinion really matters here. What does is that all of this happened by accident, without our sport having any idea it was occurring. And so what do we have here? A drop in runs, probably from early wickets, due to a small, fairly secretive company who owns the entire market trying to fix another product while no cricket body was in charge or even aware. This is a deeply, deeply unserious sport.